Hi, everyone. I'd love to invite Amanda Lenhart of Pew, Victoria Grand of YouTube, and Del Harvey of Twitter up to the stage for our first panel, which is on Playing Nice, the Challenges of the Digital Playground. So I should warn you guys, I'm going to very rigorously keep you to your 5-minute introductions and discussions so that we can launch into what will hopefully be a ferocious, feisty, contentious discussion about the digital playground. Adora has talked a lot about some of the dangers associated with these new civic spaces. And it does seem as though, as the internet has become more central to our lives, that much more of the kind of conversation about civic life is happening in that space. And that obviously introduces some complications and also raises anxieties, particularly among parents of young children. Victoria, would you like to kick off the discussion?
Sure, yeah, I'd love to. My name is Victoria Grand, and I look after communications and policy for YouTube, and it's great to see a lot of familiar faces here. Now, just as we've been here this morning, in the short span of time, about 100 new hours of video have been uploaded to YouTube. That's about 7 years of new video a day. And in fact, more video is broadcast in YouTube in just a month's time than is broadcast on all 3 major US networks over the past 80 years. So the scale of YouTube is phenomenal. And as Adora showed in countless really amazing examples, many of which I haven't seen before, the diversity of content that we see every single day is phenomenal as well. So in those hours are sort of Lady Gaga's newest video, baby's first steps, a Syrian demonstration, and a teenager's rant, sort of all combined together, and lots of sort of cute kittens and dogs on skateboards as well. Many of these platforms, what's incredible is that many of these are basically 7 years old, maybe 8 years old, and it's hard to imagine, especially if you're in the younger generation, a world where the Facebooks and the Twitters and the YouTubes and the Tumblrs don't exist. Because these platforms are such critical communications platforms, we always start from the premise, every single day, my day is filled with sort of phone calls about what do we do about this video or this has been uploaded. And the starting point for us is always a bias toward free expression, toward leaving as much content up as we can. And there are times when it's a lot easier, obviously, for things like child abuse and pornography and content that's illegal. These calls are very easy to make. And then there is content that's very challenging. It's hard to know how to properly balance the right of people to express themselves versus our ability to maintain sort of this vibrant and engaging community to exchange ideas. Some of the issues that we've seen coming up recently are some of the ones that actually Adora talked about. And if we can click here on the first video. This Am I Pretty trend, and this has now become the meme, starting to become a meme of the conference. So we saw this starting about a month ago, and it actually is about a 4-year-old trend that's been across YouTube and Twitter for some time. These are young girls who get on the camera to ask, am I pretty, am I ugly? And the question is this a disturbing teenage trend, or is it not? The girl in this video talks about how all of her friends tell her she's pretty, but she doesn't really know if she believes them, so she wants to sort of crowdsource the answer by asking a lot of people. And you can imagine that the responses are sort of all over the place, right? There are some that are positive and affirming, actually probably more than I thought there would be. And then there are some that probably do nothing for sort of a teenage girl's fragile self-esteem. And the question that we face as a private company is, should a private company take away the right of a girl to ask the question to the world, am I pretty? Is that our role, to take away that right? And is it our role to take away the right of any of you or any of us to say to anybody else, you're pretty or you're ugly? Obviously, there are going to be extreme responses to this question that go into kind of hate speech territory. But at the baseline, what do we do with this video? Do we sort of decide to make it go away? What's interesting about this trend also is that we saw that one of the most famous Am I Pretty videos, recently we found out that it was actually a 21-year-old art student who had posed as sort of a 14-year-old girl who was putting on these videos. Other trends that we've seen recently, and again, this is just sort of part of our day-to-day, the Cinnamon Challenge. These are girls and boys from all over the world who will... I'm going to do the Cinnamon Challenge. So what she's going to do is she's going to fill up a tablespoon of cinnamon and eat it, and then she's going to have some kind of a reaction that ranges from sort of gulping, gasping, maybe all of the way to potentially throwing up, though they usually don't. It's just sort of repulsive, right? And so doctors have come out and said this is bad for people's respiratory systems. It causes asthma. YouTube, please take these videos down. And again, we're sort of left to assess, okay, how dangerous is this? Do we need to take action on it? Very similar trend with Axe body spray. So in this situation, what's been happening is people have been taking this Axe body spray and putting it in their mouths. Again, just these gross out videos. Axe body spray contacts us and says, this stuff is actually really dangerous to ingest. YouTube, take action against this. And what we have to think about is, again, do you take away all of the links, Axe body spray challenges off the site? Another one that we've looked at, and I know I've talked with several of you about these in the child safety community. And I'm just going to caveat this by the next scene that you're going to see is a bit graphic. I'll switch to our next video. But the cutting videos are really interesting. People are uploading videos, and in large part, these videos are actually public service announcements. They're PSAs by fellow teenagers. In many cases, they're people who are either saying, don't do it, or who are documenting in a neutral way and trying to explain what self-injury is all about. I think we found there was a study that was done that said that only in about 7% of the cases of all the self-injury videos that are uploaded to YouTube is it actually promoting the act of self-injury. And so the question is, we have some advocates who will say, actually, these are really authentic voices. It's very important to keep them on YouTube. And then other researchers who say the very act of looking at the cutting actually triggers additional cutting. These videos should all be removed from YouTube. So interesting balance there. And then finally, the smoking videos. We recently talked to a group of state attorneys generals who asked us to remove videos of people smoking on YouTube as a whole, because when you see images of people smoking, it means that they're more likely to smoke. And so as you can imagine, we have videos of people smoking in the back of a Syria demonstration video on the curb. It's a global site. So you can imagine what a massive undertaking it would be to remove all images of people smoking. And so again, these are just some of the questions that we deal with every day. And this is just in the teen safety context. You can also imagine that we deal with questions of what do you do when terrorists use the site as a distribution platform or for recruitment? What do you do with all manner of sexual content and even graphic content? Is there content that's just too graphic for YouTube? The stuff that's coming out of Libya and Syria, should that just not be allowed to be seen? What do you do in cases like, sexually charged cases? What do you do with body paint? What do you do with man boobs? What do you do? There's just all kinds of cleavage of all sorts. So these are the types of questions that we sort of grapple with every day.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Your remarks were delightful, informative, provocative, and a bit over time. So, Del, I'm going to hope that you're going to be a little bit better on that front. Del, you're with us from Twitter, which is a kind of fascinating new civic space. And please tell us a bit about yourself and also about the work that you do.
So, I'm Del Harvey. I have been at Twitter since the dawn of time for Twitter-ish, which is like October 2008. So not... kind of a long time. In internet years, it's an incredibly long time. And I head up the trust and safety team there, which is actually an umbrella organization for a number of sub-teams covering everything from account activity and abuse to brand policy to user safety to legal policy to ads policy. There's a lot of policy, as it turns out, policy and abuse. So essentially, it's anything to do with misuse of the site ends up coming to my team for us to deal with. And of the things that we see, I am fortunate in that we are not hosting video, which I greatly appreciate in terms of it making my job easier. But we definitely see such an array of content, very similar to the, you could never actually watch all the video uploaded to YouTube every day, even if you hired a battalion of people. Similarly, if you were to actually try to read all of the tweets, it would not go so well for you. And that kind of is conflated with some other parts of Twitter that make it particularly complicated, in that we have very little context for tweets. You get 140 characters. If it's a single tweet, you really just have that 140 characters and no other information about what that tweet actually signifies or means, which becomes relevant when you see a conversation that starts out between two people and the first @reply is, "Hey, bitch," and you're like, all right, well, there are a number of possibilities here. This could be somebody being mean to someone else. This could be two friends, or this could be two accounts that are pretending to be dogs. And that's... all of these have a chance and do in fact exist. We have a very healthy, for example, My Little Pony role-playing community. So it's complicated to kind of make the decision of, this shouldn't be allowed or this shouldn't be allowed. And in general, Twitter is very much a platform. We view ourselves as a platform that is there for folks to sort of use as they see fit. And we found, as Victoria I think has as well, that in a lot of ways the community does do self-moderation also, in that if somebody's out of line in a group of people, then usually that group of people tells the person they're out of line. In terms of actual content that gets posted, there's such a just sprawling variant of use types for Twitter within that 140 characters, which is kind of impressive, that we also kind of run into the same problem of, even if we were to mediate content, which content would fall within the area of this is what should be mediated? And that's something that obviously we have a lot of conversations with folks about, because we do allow, for example, parody accounts. And we've had people say, well, yes, this is marked as a parody account. It's in compliance with your parody policies, but it's not funny. Which sometimes it's not. And that actually doesn't necessarily, though, mean that we'd want to remove it or that it is a wrong thing to have. One of the biggest things that we try to reiterate is that we really strongly believe that the correct answer to what someone perceives as bad speech is actually more good speech. In that, inevitably, if you remove content, what happens is it gets reposted. And it often gets reposted by 30 people or 50 people or even more. And it's kind of the demonstration of the Streisand effect, where Barbara Streisand, a photographer, was doing a documentary on erosion along the California coast, and one of the images included an image of her house in it, and she sued to prevent that image from being included in this coffee table book, meaning that exponentially more people now saw the image and knew it was her house than had the coffee table book just gone out. So the attempting to remove information almost always results in it being distributed more broadly, and that's one of our probably biggest challenges.
Thanks very much, Del. And you were under time, very slightly, but a little bit under time. Thank you for it. And I have a lot of questions for you, but Amanda, a lot of your research is specifically about young people and how they're using the internet, and particularly how they use mobile technology. But I was wondering if you could illuminate our perspective with a bit of your scholarly work at Pew.
Sure. So I'm a senior researcher at the Pew Research Center, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research center based in Washington, D.C. And because I'm kind of the data lady on the panel, I want to start out by talking a little bit about what do we know. And so one of my last large pieces of research was on digital citizenship writ large, which I think is a real theme that we have here today. And so I just want to make sure that we have a sense of what teens think and experience when they go particularly into social spaces online. And so when we interviewed teens, we found that, first of all, American teens are socializing in digital space. And I think that's an incredibly important thing to remember. I think we all in this room know it, but it's always good to remember that 80% of kids are actually using social media. It's also important to remember that we asked teens whether or not they felt that in general social spaces were kind or unkind spaces. We wanted to know the emotional climate of online space. And the majority of kids, about 69%, said people are mostly kind online. So in general, teens have this sense that social space online is a positive place. But it's important to remember that 20% of teens say it's actually not a positive place. And I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about some subgroups who actually are more likely to say that. But even with this positive sense that teens have, it's important to remember that teens also witness negative behavior. 88% of teens say, I have seen somebody else act mean and cruel to another person on a social networking site. That's a lot of kids. But I think if you ask kids that same question about have you witnessed somebody being mean and cruel to somebody in the hallways of your high school, you would probably get a similar number. It's also important to know that for most of these people, it's a witnessing experience. It's not a personally felt experience. Only about 15% of kids say that they have had somebody be mean and cruel directly to them in a social media space. It's also important to remember that teens are actually saying and telling us that they stand up for other kids when they see them being harassed online. Certainly the most common response to witnessing people being mean in a social space is to ignore it. And that in many ways makes sense because often if you're an adolescent, you may not know the full context about what you're seeing in digital space. It might be a joke. There might be a lot of backstory that you have no idea about. And in fact, in our focus groups, teens told us that they were more likely to stand up and defend somebody who was closer to them, where they're more likely to know the backstory. And so as I said, about 80% of teens have actually stood up for somebody they've seen being badly treated online. But because this is a yin and yang kind of experience, we also heard teens tell us that they joined in the harassment. About 20% of kids said, yep, I've joined in, I've piled on, I've helped to harass another person in a social space. And about 2/3 of teens have actually witnessed other people do this. So it is both a generally kind space, but it is a space where teens witness and experience and in many cases enact cruelty to each other. So I think we then have to ask ourselves, what kind of space do we really want? What kind of expectations for perfection do we have in social space? Should we be more worried also about the kids who are more likely to say that the internet that the social media is an unkind space? And that's in general middle school girls and African American youth, substantially more likely to tell us that, you know what, people are mean online, people are cruel and unkind. I also think we want to talk today and ask ourselves about what is the role of parents and adults in helping to set norms around online behavior. Because we see this. We know that teens act badly online. We know that generally they don't, but they see it. But what is our role as adults? And when we asked teens about where they heard about general information about online safety, parents were the dominant place. In fact, parents have a remarkably powerful role in teens' lives. Teens, in fact, told us this themselves, which is actually sometimes quite difficult to get adolescents to admit, that their parents were incredibly instrumental in helping them to think through many of these kinds of norms of behavior. Also important to note, though, in the data that an enormous number of teens told us that the average teen said that 5 different sources of information was where they got their general information online about safety. So that includes teachers who come in sort of second, right behind parents. That also includes websites and web properties. It includes people like youth pastors and coaches and your best friend's mom. There's an enormous number of places where teens are getting this information. And so in many cases, it takes a village finding that really many people are contributing to teens' understandings of how to behave online. It's also, I think, important to think about, though, specific incidences. So we ask teens, okay, so when you have a specific moment where you've witnessed something online, what do you do? About 1/3 of teens are willing to reach out to other people and say, hey, I need some advice. another 2/3 aren't. And again, we don't know exactly what these incidents are about. We don't know their severity. But when teens do reach out, they reach out to their peers. So again, even as we think about adults and their role in helping to set norms for this online behavior, peers are actually where teens are going for specific advice in a particular situation. So we can't ignore the importance of peer education. And finally, I just want to problematize this reliance, again, on adults and peers and parents. I mean, certainly, we often, I think, in that space where we're trying to figure out how to help people, we want to use education as our main way of fixing some of these problems that we see in internet space. But I think we also need to remember that not every parent is capable of being the person to give advice to every child. Not every adult is a good role model for how to behave online. That oftentimes we have expectations for our children that our adults and that we as adults don't meet. And so I think we need to ask ourselves about what is a reasonable set of expectations to have and what kinds of trade-offs are we willing to make to get to that point. And I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Amanda. So Victoria, to that last point that Amanda just made, the impression that I get from some of the issues that you raised in your discussion is that many people are looking to YouTube to adjudicate these much larger social and civic issues. For example, cigarette smoking is a bad thing, ergo I want you to remove images of it. And I kind of wonder how you feel about that, because, I mean, given that YouTube is actually serving this civic function, many people believe that, well, ergo you have this larger civic responsibility. Yet you obviously have a lot of other different agendas that you're seeking to fulfill. And I wonder, how you navigate that terrain.
Sure. I think it's a challenge when people expect a private company to solve these disputes between two children, for example, or a situation like exposure of children to tobacco. You know, one of the things that happened when the state AGs came to us is they said, well, look, we've approached the MPAA, and the MPAA is willing to take a look at this and to do more to not show images of people smoking in their movies. And the difference between the MPAA and what they can do and what YouTube can do is that we don't actually create the content, and we can't edit the content either, right? And so it's a different kind of situation. I think it's important to notice that people don't come to you. I mean, people come to YouTube to be entertained primarily, but I do think that it's a good place to be educated as well. And Del and I, when we see each other, talk about, can we be doing more to raise the profile of the education resources that we have? I think it's an ecosystem where we all can probably be doing more. I think schools can be teaching internet ethics in a much more direct way, but there's a lot that the platforms can continue to do to educate people.
Del, Twitter isn't the first thing you've done in this space of safety. Earlier on, you worked to protect children from online predators, and I wonder, you talked about a very wide range of issues, but I wonder specifically with regard to children and feelings being hurt and this kind of domain. This seems to be an area in which there are a lot of people, and Amanda was talking about parents and their attitudes and expectations. I wonder, is this particularly fraught? Is this a lot of the kind of commentary and feedback that you get where people are saying, my child was hurt in this way by these comments, and I want you to do something about it, I want you to shut down this particular account?
We actually don't have that significant of a teen presence as compared to an adult presence on Twitter. There's not as high of a number of teenagers. And that, however, certainly doesn't keep adults from having their feelings hurt. So I can still certainly speak to people who have been hurt by comments that they've received. It's actually been very interesting to watch the evolution of how folks handle getting mean comments, because the first kind of report that you get is, this person said something terrible to me, you need to stop them. And sometimes you go and look and they actually said something terrible first, but the other person replied, and that was the part that wasn't okay. And sometimes, it's more like, well, this person said something terrible about me, and you go and look, and person said something terrible, and then they tweeted, this person said something terrible about me, look at what they said, and now all of their friends have, jumped on that person that said the terrible thing. And it's this weird sort of, you need to stop this person from saying mean things, but I've already taken care of it also over here this other way. But why do you let people post mean comments? And it's a really kind of weird disconnect because I think one thing that we end up having to tell people a lot is if somebody really wants to create an account on a site, they can create an account on a site. By which I mean, say that you have an account that absolutely goes beyond the pale and it gets suspended. So they can get a proxy and a disposable email address and create 30 accounts or 50 accounts or however many accounts and use all of those accounts to do the same thing. The idea of suspension or removing the content or anything like that actually resolving this conflict has been pretty thoroughly disproven, at least in my experiences. What we found is actually helpful instead is folks just being like, hey, that was kind of a jerky thing you said. Like, what's up, dude?
Amanda, I wonder, one way of framing this discussion is that essentially what we're doing is reproducing certain kinds of patterns and certain kinds of inequalities that exist in, kind of the offline world, in the online world as well. And I wonder if you think that there's any legitimate role for the public sector for regulation. Because, it's natural to say that, I'm a private sector organization. It's not reasonable to expect me to kind of narrowly, tightly police all of this content that's being created in the name of some kind of larger civic voice, because again, these are global organizations in many cases. There are many different local standards around these issues. But I'm curious, because you're interacting with a lot of people on the public policy side, I imagine, and going back to this idea of trying to cultivate digital citizenship. Should there be some kind of role on the part of these organizations that are playing the civic role to do that?
That's an excellent question. I have to preface my response by saying that the Pew Research Center is strictly nonpartisan, and therefore I can't make any kind of policy recommendations or
Tell us about the state of the debate and sort of what some kind of might say on that front.
Yeah, and I certainly think there's, as you point out, there's a lot of incredible complexity here. These are global corporations. What holds in one jurisdiction doesn't hold in another. The privacy regulations in Europe are vastly stronger than the privacy regulations in the United States. And how do companies manage all of those different issues? I do think that thinking about, there's certainly a lot of calls. I think on one hand, there's the side of advocacy. There's the side of those who work with children, who see the damage that some of these experiences can have to children's psyches and who feel very strongly and have a lot of concern that something must be done. But on the other hand, obviously we have this need to protect the right of others to engage in free speech, as Victoria has pointed out. So I think those are the real tensions behind the debate. I do think that one of the sort of middle grounds that often gets proposed is education, because that can be incredibly localized. It starts at the user. It doesn't require a particular technological intervention. It doesn't require regulation, which makes companies flip out. It doesn't require, and it doesn't require necessarily, but what it does require is it requires a lot of work on the part of parents and requires a lot of work on the part of the end user. And I think one of the questions that really is before us is how capable is the end user of taking some of these steps? And so certainly, when you're dealing with adolescents, you have a whole overlay of emotional and emotional difficulties on top of not necessarily being as familiar with the technology. And I think we have expectations. I think in this room, we're all incredibly tech savvy, right? We are comfortable with the technology. Everybody's got their laptops cracked open. But you go back and think about your relatives, think about your mom, think about your, second cousin Susie, who maybe doesn't know what's underneath the hood of her computer and who doesn't want to know and who has a very basic knowledge, and then expecting those folks to really be able to rise to the level of saying, hey, my son or my daughter really needs to take these 6 steps to protect him or herself in the online world, when the parent themselves doesn't even know that those steps need to be taken. So I think there's a lot at play here that makes this a complicated space.
Before I open it up for questions, I have one last question for Del and for Victoria. I wonder, do you think that there's been an evolving understanding on the part of users? That is, do you think that people have a greater appreciation that you guys are, in a way, a platform for other people's voices rather than an active agent in deciding kind of, what kinds of content you seek to promote?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is we're not advocating a sort of no action approach here. I think if you look at what our teams every day, they spend a lot of time looking at what is our turnaround time for taking down porn that gets uploaded to the site. Look at a site like a chat roulette, for example, something that could just implode if you allowed a lot of porn and a lot of nudity to go on it. And so obviously we deal a lot with the porn situation. We have a lot of user control. So for example, for the Am I Ugly videos, that user who uploaded that video had the ability to turn comments off altogether, to moderate her comments, to block people who commented. Users also have the ability to say, hey, I appear in this video and I did not consent. I want this image of me removed through this video. And we're working right now on blurring technology that will allow people to blur images of other people in videos. So I don't think we're saying sort of stand back and do nothing. And I do think that the social norms are growing around it. I feel like when we launch YouTube in any new country, we usually see a massive spike in flagging. And then very quickly it sort of adjusts itself and people start to learn what is and is not acceptable to upload.
And I'd say similarly, we have a lot of the same, we're also not hands-off. There are things that we do not allow, and we very actively try to protect against as many of those as possible. I would say the other thing that we're working on and that we actually talk to a lot of the other companies in this space about pretty regularly is trying to actually share more information and more of the work that we're doing on the educational side between each other also, because, for example, Victoria and I have often chatted about this is a space where it's not competitive, right? Like this is helping people out, keeping people safe, helping kids, educating people. Like I'm not going to be like Victoria just saying my resources are a little better than yours. Right? Like it doesn't benefit people. Like this is one of the realms where it really is. We can all work together without having to be worried about, oh, well, I don't know, the page views for that help page over there are bigger than mine. I gotta get some people viewing this now. There's just so much more happening in that space than we really ever have had before, and it's been over the past probably 2 years that for Twitter at least, that we've really started talking with other companies and trying to make sure that there is this ongoing dialogue of, what should we be addressing as companies? What are users not aware of? What do they need to know more about, et cetera? And you can probably speak to the same.
Yeah, no, I think it's hard. It's like feeding people spinach, though. People come to the platform to be entertained. They might not go to the safety section. And so a lot of the conversations have been about how do you involve youth in teaching youth, and how can you create virality around the phenomenon of flagging, of privacy controls, of those kinds of things, because it's hard to get people to focus on them.
Does anyone have any questions? I don't want to eat too much into your break time, but there's a gentleman back there. And
hello. How do you deal with exposing what are appropriate memes or discussion models? Because I think that's an interesting point, that if people can say what's appropriate for themselves, either in their profile or in the discussion you're hosting around some content, that would let people, kind of like we did with the internet, rough consensus and running real-time discussions. That would be something that I think there maybe is a model there, and maybe you could discuss that. That's scalable.
Amanda, would you like to field that?
I'm not sure that question is directed at...
Oh, if there's anyone who'd like to field it, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the vast majority of the content that's on these platforms is acceptable. We've tried to do things like blog about, for example, when content is coming in from Syria or from Libya or from citizen journalists on the ground, oftentimes it's very graphic, and it will be a video that's coming from a cell phone that will be labeled with something like 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's extremely graphic, but it doesn't have any context attached to it. So it's very hard for us to reckon with, can we leave this up without any context for people to know why there's a brain on the ground here, right? That it's not just sort of a shock and disgust type of video. And so we've tried to do blogs around this topic, around things like artistic nudity and how to make sure that those videos can stay up and they're not taken down. Again, I think the issue that we're always tackling is this limited attention span. And I think having some breakthroughs with the teen safety community around how can we, and I'm sure you guys think about it every day, how can we battle that? Because those blog posts don't get viewed nearly as much as the videos. How can we partner with the Conies of the world, which got, gosh, I think that video got more views than any other television show in the US this year apart from the Super Bowl. How can we bring the awareness to that level? It's very hard to cut through the noise.
Hi. I have a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, and an 11-year-old, and they're constantly asking me to go on YouTube. And I know that I can't put them on YouTube and leave the room, and go do the dishes. I have to be right there because there's an opportunity to click away to anything. What are the age ranges that you would recommend for use for YouTube when you can, and I hate to say this, but walk away and leave them watching that video while you go and do the laundry, or what are the terms of use for age?
Yeah, they're 13 plus, and I know that there are a lot of parents that go onto YouTube with their kids when they're under 13. We also have a safety mode setting that you can set, and that means that videos that have been marked for 18 plus do not get presented. The other thing that happens with safety mode is we actually have an algorithm that scans all videos for flesh tones, believe it or not, and videos that are deemed to be high on flesh tones are not included in safety mode. That does capture a lot of baby videos as well, so there's some false positives. But yeah, we say that the age for sort of surfing solo is 13, and I know that many people say that's not realistic and go on with their children before to teach them some of these norms.
Hi, you got to my question a little bit in terms of what type of models are being built to have this predictive element to conflict on these platforms. So I just wanted to have an open question if there were any other predictive algorithms or models that you all are building to find conflict on Twitter or YouTube before it happens.
Sure. I think what's interesting, whenever we talk about controversial content on YouTube and we say, well, the scale is so massive, people have no sympathy for that argument. And I tell my friends this, and they'll say, but you're Google, figure it out, And the challenge is that an algorithm actually can't do most of this work. So even when you're talking about things like nudity, an algorithm isn't going to be able to know whether the nudity is being presented in a breast cancer documentary, in a surgery, in an artistic nudity context. And so actually what we do is we use algorithms to organize videos for review. So you scan for flesh tones. If it's high on flesh tones, it means people are going to be reviewing it faster. You scan for things like the flagger's reputation. How accurate is this flagger usually? Do they always flag the Justin Bieber videos because they just want to take them down? If so, down in the queue, right? Has this video already been flagged before and been reviewed by a human? Down in the queue. How hot is it? What is the flag to view ratio? Very high up in the queue if it's hot. So we use algorithms to help us to prioritize the review, but ultimately a human does need to look at those because so many of these decisions really do turn on context. You think about the N-word. We can't sort of do a scrub of all of YouTube and just remove the N-word from every single comment because it might be self-referential, it might be in an Eddie Murphy video, comedic. There's so many different ways that context comes into play that any use of just a broad algorithm would be overbroad, and it would be, from our point of view, censorship.
Del, do you have any thoughts on the use of predictive analytics?
I would say that what we actually use our algorithms for more, and I actually know you do this as well, is actually dealing with the spam component of it, right? So sure, this is a lovely video of a child gurgling at a cute puppy. And the comments is something along the line of, great video, you should check out my site, cheapcialis.com. And you're like, I don't think you watched this video. I'm pretty sure. And then, we actually use a lot of stuff to identify spam and remove spam. And I would actually wager that one thing that I've seen that I would imagine that YouTube sees as well is if somebody's really a bad actor on your site, they are just doing terrible things, they are not just doing terrible things in terms of being mean at somebody. They're also creating multiple accounts. They're sock puppet accounts. They're straight up impersonation on something. They're violating other rules. And we see a lot of bad actors, again, that get flagged because of spam violations, essentially, even if what you might say, hey, this account's bad because of X, and it's not spam.
Guys, we have a break now until...